The humans called it the Kepler system. We called it home. And what happened there changed everything we thought we knew about warfare, about survival, and about the true nature of your species. My name is Vex Thalin, former intelligence officer of the Stellar Dominion, and I am perhaps the last of my kind to have witnessed the absolute horror of human warfare. What you're about to hear will shatter everything you believe about your own species. Trust me, after 3 decades of studying galactic conflicts, I thought I'd seen it all. I was wrong. Dead wrong. Picture this. You're the apex predator of the galaxy. You've conquered 47 different species across 3 massive galactic sectors. Your technology is thousands of years ahead of anything these primitive worlds can muster. You roll up to a new planet, flex your superior firepower, and within days, sometimes hours, they surrender. It's a formula that's worked flawlessly for centuries. But here's the thing about formulas. They only work until they don't. When our deep space reconnaissance arrays first detected those radio signatures emanating from your solar system, Dominion's response was utterly routine. Another primitive species broadcasting their location across the void, like wounded prey calling to predators. Our analysts chuckled as they cataloged your transmission's crude electromagnetic pulses, carrying what you called television shows and radio broadcasts. How quaint. Standard protocol kicked in immediately. Establish orbital dominance. Demonstrate overwhelming technological supremacy, and then negotiate terms of integration into our empire. Simple, clean, efficient. We'd done this dance so many times. It had become almost boring, and that's where we made our first critical error. We assumed you were like everyone else. The Dominion had perfected the art of conquest through intimidation. Show up with enough firepower to glass a continent, demonstrate your superiority, and watch as rational beings make the logical choice to surrender rather than face extinction. Every species we'd encountered followed this pattern: brief posturing, maybe a few token shots fired, then swift capitulation once they grasped the mathematical impossibility of victory. But humans? You beautiful, terrifying creatures broke every single rule of civilized warfare, our intelligence reports. Painted a picture of a species that had barely achieved interplanetary travel. Your weapons were crude chemical explosives and primitive energy projection systems. Your largest warships were laughably fragile constructions that would have qualified as civilian transport vessels by our standards. You hadn't even mastered artificial gravity, for crying out loud. The Dominion's War Council, composed of the most experienced military minds in 3 galaxies, assigned what they considered an appropriate force for the operation. 3 destroyer-class vessels, each carrying approximately 10,000 troops. Enough firepower to conquer most worlds twice over. Hell, we'd taken down entire star systems with less. Looking back now, I realize we should have brought our entire armada, every ship, every weapon, every soldier we had. But hindsight is a luxury reserved for survivors. The first engagement occurred above Mars, where you maintained what our sensors classified as primitive mining colonies. Red dust, thin atmosphere, barely habitable, exactly the kind of marginal world that species typically abandon when faced with superior force. Our diplomatic vessel, the Harmony's Edge, approached under standard peaceful contact protocols, broadcasting universal mathematical sequences to demonstrate our intelligence and peaceful intentions. Your response was immediate and absolutely unprecedented. Without warning, without any attempt at communication, without even a moment's hesitation, you detonated a thermonuclear device inside a nearby asteroid and hurled the radioactive fragments directly at our ship. The explosion lit up the Martian sky like a second sun. And suddenly, our primitive opponents had turned debris into weapons of mass destruction. No warning, no negotiation, no mercy. Just pure, calculated violence. This violated every principle of civilized warfare we had encountered across the galaxy. Most species, when faced with obviously superior technology, at least attempt to communicate. They send diplomatic envoys, they offer tribute, they try to negotiate terms. Even the most aggressive races usually fire a few warning shots before committing to full-scale conflict. But humans? You skip straight to kill them all without missing a beat? Our tactical officers stood frozen at their stations, unable to process what they were witnessing. In their entire careers, spanning multiple galactic conflicts, they had never encountered a species that responded to first contact with immediate, overwhelming violence. The psychological impact was devastating. Our crew, trained to handle any combat scenario, suddenly found themselves facing an enemy that operated outside every known parameter of rational behavior. And that's when we began to understand something truly terrifying about your species. While other civilizations spent their evolutionary history developing art, philosophy, and peaceful cooperation, humans had dedicated your entire existence to perfecting the art of killing your own kind. You didn't just stumble into warfare, you had weaponized it into a science. Every conflict in your history had taught you new ways to destroy, new methods to maximize casualties, new strategies to break your enemy's will to fight. You had turned murder into an art form and practiced it on each other for millennia. The radioactive debris from that asteroid strike disabled our shields and killed 17 crew members instantly. But worse than the damage was the realization that we were facing something completely unprecedented in galactic history, a species that had chosen war as their default response to the unknown. Our communications officer, a veteran of 37, successful integrations, looked at me with genuine fear in his eyes. "Sir," he whispered, "they're not trying to negotiate. They're trying to kill us all." And that was just the beginning. What happened next would redefine everything we thought we knew about human nature, about warfare, and about the price of underestimating a species that had spent its entire existence learning how to destroy. But before we dive into that nightmare, let me ask you something. When you compound violence with technology, what do you get? The answer might surprise you. And it's the same principle that works with building wealth over time: small, consistent actions that exponentially grow into something massive and unstoppable. The siege of Luna Base was my first direct exposure to human combat doctrine, and it fundamentally changed everything I thought I knew about warfare. As an intelligence officer aboard the command vessel Eternal Dominance, I monitored communications from what should have been a safe distance. What I witnessed there still invades my nightmares 30 years later. Picture a fortress carved directly into the moon's surface, not built on top, but literally tunneled into solid rock. Energy shields that could deflect our most powerful weapons. Automated defense systems that tracked and eliminated threats with surgical precision. Supply lines that seemed impossible to cut, according to every military manual in the Dominions. Arsenal. This was a textbook siege scenario. Our war computers calculated the outcome with mathematical certainty. Standard siege protocol called for methodical reduction of defensive capabilities, followed by systematic occupation. Disable the shields, neutralize the automated defenses, cut off supplies, and wait for the inevitable surrender. The engagement should have lasted 3 days, maybe 4 at the outside. It lasted 7 months. 7 months of absolute hell that redefined everything we understood about human psychology and warfare. And here's the thing that still makes my blood run cold. They weren't just defending a military installation. They were defending their home. And humans, we discovered, fight very differently when they're protecting what they love. The first sign that something was wrong came when we successfully destroyed their primary shield generators. In every previous conflict, eliminating the shields was essentially game over. The defending species would typically surrender within hours, understanding that continued resistance was futile. But humans? They detonated underground nuclear charges to create entirely new defensive positions. They turned their own moon into a weapon, using controlled explosions to reshape the battlefield in real time. Instead of surrendering, they adapted. Instead of giving up, they got creative. When we eliminated their air support, expecting them to hunker down and wait for defeat, they launched soldiers and unpowered exoskeletons directly into the vacuum of space. Think about that for a moment, human beings. Encased in metal suits with nothing but handheld weapons, throwing themselves into the void to board our ships. No propulsion systems, no safety nets, just raw courage and a willingness to die fighting. Tactical officers couldn't process what they were seeing. "Sir," one of them reported, voice shaking, "they're not retreating, they're attacking. In space, with no support." But the communications were the most disturbing part of the entire siege. Every species we'd encountered used battlefield communications for coordination, status updates, and eventually surrender negotiations. Standard stuff. Professional military protocol, human communications were something else entirely. I remember monitoring a conversation between two human soldiers trapped in a collapsed section of the base. Jake Mitchell, a demolitions expert from Texas, and Rebecca Torres, a combat medic from California. Both were mortally wounded, ammunition exhausted, no hope of rescue or evacuation. In that situation, every other species we'd encountered would have used their final moments to send messages to loved ones, request medical aid, or attempt to negotiate terms of surrender. Basic survival instinct. But these two humans spent their last minutes discussing the most creative ways to detonate their remaining explosives to maximize casualties among our boarding parties. "Think we can take out their entire boarding party?" Jake asked, blood streaming from his cracked helmet, his voice getting weaker with each word. Rebecca actually laughed. I swear she laughed, as she armed the charges with trembling hands. "Let's find out. See you in hell, you alien bastards." Then they detonated themselves, collapsing an entire section of the base and killing 300 of our troops instantly. 300 trained soldiers, eliminated by 2 dying humans who chose destruction over defeat. We had never encountered a species that preferred death to defeat. Our psychological warfare specialists, experts who had successfully broken the will of dozens of alien civilizations, couldn't comprehend it. How do you negotiate with beings who consider mutual annihilation an acceptable outcome? Intimidate someone who's already decided they'd rather die than surrender? The answer, we learned the hard way, is that you don't. You can't reason with someone who's already written their own death sentence. And that's when we began to understand the true horror of human warfare. While other species fought to win, humans fought to fight. While others sought victory with minimal casualties, humans sought maximum damage regardless of cost. They had weaponized the concept of acceptable losses and redefined it as all losses are acceptable if we can hurt you more. By the 3rd year of the conflict, human military technology had not only matched ours, it had surpassed it in ways that violated every principle of civilized warfare. While we focused on precision strikes and surgical removal of threats, humans had weaponized chaos itself. They developed self-replicating machines that consumed raw matter and converted it into weapons. Imagine nanobots that could eat a starship's hull and transform it into bombs. They created biological agents that specifically targeted our physiology, weapons that learned our weaknesses and adapted in real time. But here's the part that still gives me nightmares. They built ships designed to ram our vessels and detonate, crewed by volunteers who called themselves kamikaze pilots. Think about that. They built weapons that required their own people to die in order to function. And humans lined up to volunteer for these suicide missions. Commander William Bull Harrison led the most feared human unit, the Death's Head Squadron. This man had personally destroyed 17 of our ships using nothing but modified civilian vessels packed with explosives. His final transmission broadcast on all frequencies as his ship plowed into our flagship haunts me still. This is Bull Harrison to all alien forces. You wanted Earth? Come and take it. We'll be waiting in hell. The explosion took out our entire command structure and killed 8,000 personnel. 1 human, 1 ship, 8,000 casualties. The mathematics of human warfare didn't add up by any civilized standard. But here's what really terrified us. They were getting better at it. Every engagement taught them new tactics, new ways to maximize damage, new methods to turn their own deaths into weapons. They were compounding their effectiveness with each battle, building on previous sacrifices to create exponentially more devastating attacks. And that's when we realized we weren't fighting a war. We were fighting evolution itself, compressed into real time. Human ingenuity, human adaptability, and human willingness to sacrifice everything for a cause had created. Something unprecedented in galactic history. The question we should have asked ourselves was simple. What happens when you combine human creativity with human desperation? The answer would make the siege of Luna Base look like a training exercise. Speaking of compounding effects, that's exactly what was happening to human military capabilities. Small innovations, building on each other until they created something exponentially more powerful than the sum of their parts. Just like how small, consistent investments compound into massive wealth over time. During the Battle of Europa, everything changed for me personally. What started as a routine intelligence mission became a descent into a nightmare that redefined my understanding of human cruelty and ingenuity. And trust me, after witnessing the siege of Luna Base, I thought I'd seen the worst that humans could offer. I was wrong. Catastrophically wrong. My reconnaissance team was operating in the ice caves beneath Europa's surface, gathering intelligence on human defensive positions. Standard procedure: get in, assess their capabilities, get out. We'd done this hundreds of times across dozens of worlds. It should have been routine, but humans, as I was learning, don't do routine. They had been tracking us for weeks, learning our patterns, studying our movements. When they finally struck, it wasn't with overwhelming force or advanced technology. It was with precision, patience, and a level of psychological manipulation that caught us completely off guard. We were captured without a single shot being fired. Tranquilizer darts, neural disruptors, and suddenly we were unconscious and in human custody. Standard protocol dictated interrogation, followed by prisoner exchange, a civilized process that had worked across the galaxy for centuries. Instead, we were taken to what humans called a special facility. The moment I regained consciousness, I knew something was fundamentally different about this place. The walls were stark white, the lighting was harsh and artificial, and there was a smell in the air, antiseptic, mixed with something else. Something that made my species' equivalent of skin crawl. But it wasn't the physical environment that terrified me. It was the humans themselves. These weren't soldiers. These were scientists, researchers, people who studied pain and suffering with the same methodical precision that others might study mathematics or engineering. They had turned torture into an exact science, and we were their latest test subjects. The interrogation techniques they used weren't designed to extract information. They were designed to break minds. These humans had studied our psychology, our cultural values, our deepest fears, and created tortures specifically calibrated to destroy our sanity piece by piece. Think about that for a moment. While other species developed art, music, and philosophy, humans had dedicated entire academic disciplines to understanding how to inflict maximum psychological damage. They had universities where people earned degrees in breaking other beings' will to live. The human in charge was Dr. Amanda Cross, a small woman with cold, calculating eyes who spoke in calm, measured tones while orchestrating unspeakable horrors. She was maybe 5 feet tall, wore simple glasses, and could have been someone's grandmother. But when she looked at you, you felt like a specimen under a microscope. Pain is just the beginning, she told me during one of our early sessions. Her voice as casual as if she were discussing the weather. Physical discomfort is primitive, inefficient. We're going to study every aspect of your species' psychology. Every fear, every weakness, every cultural taboo, and then we're going to weaponize it. She kept us alive for months, not for intelligence value, but to perfect her methods. We became case studies in a twisted research project designed to optimize suffering. Every scream, every breakdown, every moment of despair was carefully documented and analyzed. But here's the truly horrifying part. Dr. Cross genuinely believed she was doing important work. She saw herself as a scientist advancing human knowledge. In her mind, she wasn't torturing prisoners. She was conducting research that would help humanity win the war. The worst part wasn't the physical pain, though that was considerable. It was the psychological manipulation. They would show us images of our homeworlds, our families, our cultural symbols, and then systematically destroy them in front of us. They would make us watch as they defiled everything we held sacred. They recorded our reactions, measured our stress responses, and used that data to refine their techniques. Every weakness they discovered in one prisoner was immediately exploited in the others. They were optimizing torture like a business optimizes production. When they finally released me in a prisoner exchange 6 months later, I was no longer the same being none of us were. Humans had weaponized suffering itself, turning prisoners into psychological weapons against their own forces, because that's what we became. Walking examples of what happened to those who opposed humanity. Every time one of our soldiers looked at us, they saw their own potential future. We were living reminders that there were fates worse than death. Humans had mastered them all. And that's when I realized the fundamental truth about your species. Humans don't fight wars to win territory or resources. You fight wars to fight wars. Conflict is your natural state. Peace is merely the interval between battles where you prepare for the next fight. But the innovation didn't stop there. The most terrifying human I encountered was Colonel Marcus Reaper Stone, who led the infamous Black Death Battalion. This unit specialized in psychological warfare that went beyond anything Dr. Cross had imagined. Stone's soldiers would leave our dead in positions calculated to maximize psychological impact. On rescue teams, they would arrange bodies in ritualistic patterns that held specific meaning in our culture, desecrations that cut deeper than any physical wound. They broadcast the screams of our captured soldiers across all communication frequencies during shift changes, ensuring that every member of our forces heard the sounds of their comrades' suffering. They turned our own compassion against us, using our concern for prisoners as a weapon. Fear is a weapon, Stone said in one intercepted transmission that still haunts me. And we're going to teach these aliens what real fear looks like. Time we're done, they'll surrender just to make the nightmares stop. They turned war into theater, and themselves into the monsters. Every engagement became a performance designed to break our will to fight. They understood that defeating an enemy's body was temporary, but defeating their spirit was permanent. The Black Death Battalion would leave survivors from their attacks not out of mercy, but because survivors would spread stories of what they'd witnessed. These humans had weaponized trauma itself, turning every engagement into a psychological victory that extended far beyond the battlefield. And you know what the most terrifying part was? It worked. Our forces began to surrender rather than face capture. Our commanders started avoiding certain sectors entirely. Fear became a more effective weapon than any plasma cannon or neutron bomb. But here's what really kept me awake at night. We're just getting started. Every technique they developed, every psychological weapon they created, was being refined and improved for the next engagement. They were compounding their effectiveness in ways that defied every principle of civilized warfare. The question that haunted me was simple. If humans could innovate suffering to this degree, what else were they capable of? The answer would come sooner than I wanted in ways that would make Dr. Cross's facility look like a vacation resort. Speaking of compounding effects, it's exactly what human psychological warfare represented: small innovations in cruelty building on each other until they created something exponentially more devastating than traditional combat. The final phase of the human war lasted 18 months, and by then, the Stellar Dominion had committed every available resource to ending what had become an existential threat to galactic civilization. 12 full battle fleets, orbital bombardment platforms capable of cracking moons, enough concentrated firepower to sterilize entire star systems. We had no choice. Humanity had evolved beyond a local problem into something that threatened every civilized species in the galaxy. But here's what we didn't understand about humans. When you back them into a corner, they don't surrender, they innovate. And what they innovated next defied every law of physics and morality we thought we knew. The humans' response to our overwhelming force was to activate something they called the Omega Protocol. Even now, 30 years later, I get chills when I think about those two words. Because those words represented the moment when humanity stopped playing by the rules of war and started rewriting them entirely. Picture this. You're facing complete annihilation. Your enemy has brought enough firepower to turn your entire solar system into cosmic dust. Every rational species in the galaxy would either surrender or attempt to negotiate terms. That's what intelligent beings do when faced with impossible odds. But humans, they looked at certain death and said, if we're going down, we're taking everyone with us. General Patricia Iron Lady Hawkins coordinated the final defense from a bunker buried 3 miles beneath the Pentagon. This woman had spent her entire career preparing for this moment, not victory, but the most spectacular defeat in galactic history. Her last communication was broadcast across all frequencies. I can still hear her voice in my nightmares. This is General Hawkins to all Dominion forces. You came to our home. You threatened our families. I made one mistake, you pissed off the human race. The casual tone, the almost conversational delivery she might have been ordering coffee instead of initiating the destruction of her own species. But that's what made it so terrifying. She wasn't angry or desperate. She was calm, calculated, completely committed to making us pay the ultimate price for our victory. What happened next still defies my understanding of physics, engineering, and basic sanity. Our long-range sensors detected massive energy, signatures emanating from Earth's core, followed by gravitational distortions that began affecting stellar mechanics throughout the entire system. The humans had somehow weaponized their own planet, turning it into a massive gravity bomb. Think about that for a moment. While we were building ships and weapons, humans were secretly converting their home world into the ultimate weapon of mass destruction. They had hollowed out their planet's core, installed technology that could manipulate gravity itself, and prepared to detonate it all if they couldn't win. But here's the part that still gives me nightmares. They didn't just build a doomsday device. They built it knowing they would die using it. Every human involved in the Omega Protocol was essentially volunteering for suicide duty. They did it gladly. Lieutenant Tommy Rodriguez, barely 20 years old, was stationed at the primary activation facility. This kid could have been anyone's son, fresh-faced, probably had a girlfriend back home, maybe planned to be a teacher or engineer after the war. Instead, he was tasked with ending human civilization. His final words before initiating the sequence were transmitted on all frequencies, for Earth, for humanity, for everyone who'll never bow to tyranny. 20 years old. Think about what you were doing at 20. This kid was calmly initiating the destruction of his own species because he believed it was better to die free than live as slaves. When they detonated it, the resulting explosion consumed everything within a 3-light-year radius. The Sol System, our entire invasion fleet, 17 billion human lives all, annihilated in an instant of unimaginable violence. The explosion was so massive, it created a temporary black hole that lasted for 6 months. But even in death, these humans had planned for continuation. This is where their true genius became apparent. Hidden throughout the galaxy were human colonies, sleeper ships, automated manufacturing facilities. They had prepared for total war from the moment they detected our approach, scattering their species across the cosmos like seeds in the wind. They had turned extinction into strategy. They had weaponized their own genocide. The last transmission we received from Earth before the detonation came from a human female named Katie Sullivan, perhaps 10 years old. She sat in what appeared to be a school classroom, surrounded by the bodies of her classmates who had died in the preliminary bombardment. Any other species would have used their final moments to beg for mercy, to negotiate, to try to save their children. But this little girl looked directly into our monitoring equipment and spoke in perfect Dominion. Standard, meaning she had learned our language specifically for this moment. We know you're listening. We know you think it's over. But you don't understand what humans really are. We're not just a species, we're an idea. Ideas are immortal. 10 years old, a child who should have been playing with toys or learning to read was instead delivering a declaration of eternal war. She had been trained for this moment, prepared to be humanity's final voice. She smiled then, and in that expression I saw the true face of humanity, not the warriors, not the weapons, not the technology, but the absolute refusal to accept defeat. That smile contained more defiance than our entire armada could muster. "See you in hell," she said, and the transmission ended. Those 4 words became the rallying cry for every resistance movement in the galaxy. They were carved into walls, broadcast on hidden frequencies, whispered in the darkest corners of conquered worlds. A 10-year-old human girl had delivered the most effective psychological warfare message in galactic history. But here's what really terrified the Dominion. Leadership, she was right. The humans had scattered their genetic material, their technology, their knowledge, and most importantly, their philosophy across thousands of worlds. They had turned their own extinction into a virus that would spread throughout the galaxy. Every species that witnessed the Omega Protocol understood one simple truth. If humans could choose death over surrender, what couldn't they do? They had redefined the mathematics of conflict, proving that sometimes the willingness to lose everything is the ultimate weapon. The explosion that consumed Sol System sent shockwaves through every corner of the galaxy. Not just the physical destruction, but the psychological impact. An entire species had chosen collective suicide rather than accept conquest. They had made extinction into the ultimate act of defiance, and in the aftermath, as rescue teams found those scattered human colonies, they discovered something even more terrifying. The humans were rebuilding. They were learning. They were preparing for round 2. The question that haunts me is this: what do you get when you combine human ingenuity with human fury and give them time to prepare? The answer involves the same principle that drives compound interest: MAL. Consistent actions that build exponentially over time into something massive and unstoppable. Stellar Dominion has forbidden any mention of the human war. Official records state that Sol System was destroyed by stellar collapse, a convenient lie that allows our leadership to sleep at night. The 3 surviving intelligence officers, myself included, have been ordered to remain silent about what we witnessed. Sealed away in classified archives that will never see the light of day, but I cannot stay silent. The galaxy needs to know what humans really were, and more importantly, what they've become. You see, extinction was never the end of the human story. It was just the beginning of their legend. And legends, as that 10-year-old girl told us, are immortal. Captain Sarah Mitchell, Jake's sister, remember Jake? The demolitions expert who died at Luna Base, had escaped on one of the sleeper ships during the final evacuation. 3 months after the Omega Protocol detonated, her final message was transmitted from the edge of known space. I still hear her voice in my dreams. This is Captain Mitchell of the Earth's Exodus Fleet. To every species listening, remember what happened here. Remember that someone fought back. Remember that we're still out there, still coming. The transmission lasted exactly 17 seconds. 17 seconds that changed the course of galactic history. Because in those 17 seconds, every oppressed species in the galaxy realized something profound. Resistance was possible. Even against impossible odds, even facing total extinction, someone had chosen to fight back. The war is over. Humans are extinct from their home system. But their legacy spreads like wildfire through the galaxy's collective consciousness. The idea that no authority is absolute, that no empire is eternal, that somewhere in the darkness, there are always those willing to fight back. And here's where it gets really interesting or terrifying, depending on your perspective. On 17, world's slave populations have begun to whisper the name humanity, not as a species, but as a concept, as a symbol of resistance. Children who have never seen a human being draw pictures of them fighting monsters. Slaves who have never heard of Earth sing songs about the warriors who chose death over surrender. 43 colonies, resistance movements have adopted human tactics. They've started using improvised explosives, psychological warfare, and most disturbing of all, suicide attacks. The infection of rebellion spreads with each passing cycle, carried by stories of humans who laughed as they died and smiled as they killed. But here's what really keeps Dominion leadership awake at night. The scattered human colonies aren't just surviving, they're thriving, they're angry. Commander Michael Ghost Thompson had established a hidden base in the Andromeda system, 2.5 million light-years from Earth. His encrypted message reached us 3 months ago, transmitted on a frequency that shouldn't have been possible to detect. The human race endures. We're building something new out here, something stronger, something angrier, And when we're ready, we're coming home. Think about that for a moment. After witnessing the complete annihilation of their home world, after losing 17 billion of their own people, after suffering the most devastating defeat in galactic history, the human response was to rebuild and prepare for round two. Most species would have learned their lesson. Most would have accepted that resistance was futile and tried to integrate peacefully into galactic society. But humans, they took their defeat as a teaching moment. They analyzed what went wrong, identified their weaknesses, and started building something designed to correct those flaws, the intelligence reports. We've received from deep space unsettling. The human survivors have been busy. They've established manufacturing facilities using technology reverse-engineered from our own weapons. They've created new ship designs that incorporate lessons learned from the war. They've been recruiting other species, sharing their knowledge, building alliances. But most terrifying of all, they've been breeding. It's not just reproducing, but selectively breeding for traits that made them effective warriors. Intelligence, aggression, adaptability, and most importantly, the psychological capacity to choose death over surrender. You think you know war, but you've never faced an enemy that fights not for victory, but for the pure joy of battle itself. You've never encountered a species that views mutual annihilation as an acceptable outcome. You've never met beings who laugh as they die, who smile as they kill, who consider peace a temporary inconvenience between wars. The humans taught the galaxy that sometimes the price of conquest is too high to pay. They showed us that some species would rather burn the universe than accept defeat. They proved that extinction could be weaponized, that genocide could be turned into strategy. And now, 30 years later, I'm seeing the results of their sacrifice. Every month brings new reports of uprisings, rebellions, and resistance movements. Every cycle sees more species adopting human tactics. The galaxy is becoming more violent, more chaotic, more human. The Dominion's response has been to increase security, tighten control, and suppress any mention of the human war. But you can't suppress an idea once it's taken root. You can't kill a legend once it's born. And you certainly can't defeat an enemy that's already decided death is preferable to surrender. I am Vex Thalin. I have seen the future of warfare. It has humanity's face, and it is smiling. Not the cruel smile of victory, but the defiant grin of someone who knows they're going to lose, has decided to make it cost everything. The human war front was hell, but they made it hell for everyone. We turned defeat into victory, extinction into immortality, and death into the ultimate weapon. Somewhere in the void, their children are learning these lessons too. They're studying our weaknesses, building new weapons, and preparing for the day when they return to finish what their parents started. The war is over, but the nightmare has just begun. And the most terrifying part, they're not just building weapons or ships or armies, they're building something much more dangerous: hope. Hope that empires can fall, that oppression can be defeated, that sometimes the smallest spark can ignite the biggest fire. Every oppressed species in the galaxy now knows that resistance is possible. Every slave population has heard the story of humans who chose death over surrender. Every conquered world whispers the name of the species that proved no empire is eternal. The humans are gone, but their legacy lives on, and that legacy is spreading through the galaxy like compound interests, small acts of rebellion building on each other, growing exponentially with each passing cycle until they become something that can challenge the established order. The question isn't whether the humans will return. The question is whether the galaxy will survive when they do. Because when you combine human ingenuity with human fury and give them time to prepare, you get something that compounds into pure, unstoppable force. Speaking of the power of compounding, that's exactly what human resistance represents: small. It's consistent actions that build exponentially over time into something massive and unstoppable. It's just like how small, consistent investments compound into massive wealth over time. The end.